It started with a gift, a small, shrink-wrapped box under the Christmas tree. Mark Walker handed it to his wife, Rachel, and their 3 teenage sons, laughing as he explained how the DNA kits were just for fun. A way to explore family heritage. See where their ancestors came from. No one suspected that within weeks, the results would explode everything they thought they knew. The tests came back in January. Mark sat at the kitchen table, reading and rereading the numbers that didn't add up. None of his 3 boys, Jalen, Bryce, or Micah, shared his DNA. Not even a partial match. At first, he thought it was a technical glitch. He even joked about it. Maybe they mixed up the tubes, he said, but there was no humor behind his eyes. Rachel dismissed it quickly. These things aren't 100%, she insisted, waving the papers off like dust on the counter. But something in her voice, a tremble too faint for the boys to notice, lodged itself in Mark's brain. So he sent for another test. Privately. Then a third. Each result said the same thing. Mark was not the biological father of his children. In the quiet of their upper-middle-class Atlanta home, Mark stopped speaking. He ate in silence. He stopped checking on the boys' college prep. Stopped sitting in church beside Rachel. And then one day in February, he vanished. The college funds, close to $180,000, had been emptied overnight. Rachel reported him missing. She cried on the news. "If anyone sees Mark, tell him we love him. We just want him home." Her voice cracked at just the right moments. But behind the scenes, she was panicking. Texting friends late at night. Hushed conversations by the door. Refusing police follow-ups. And then, a week later, her car was found smoldering at the edge of a wooded service road in Clayton County. Inside the trunk, a body. Badly burned. Gender undetermined. No ID. But police said the car belonged to Rachel Walker, and there were no signs she'd made it out. A community vigil followed. Friends wept. Neighbors left flowers. Her sons stood shoulder to shoulder, stunned and fatherless. But then came the footage. 3 days before the car was found, a woman matching Rachel's description had boarded a red-eye flight to Panama. Alone. Wearing a scarf and sunglasses. She wasn't dead. She had run. The headlines stopped. The vigil candles went out. And the story the public thought they knew shattered all over again. Welcome to Shocking True Crime Files. We share crime stories inspired by real events. Some you know, others you don't. We appreciate you being here. Subscribe to support the channel and join our growing community. Rachel Walker was, by all appearances, the kind of woman people trusted instantly. She volunteered at church, headed the PDA, sent handwritten thank you notes to teachers. Her social media was a curated gallery of back-to-school photos, anniversary dinners, and motivational Bible quotes. "God gives his hardest battles to his strongest soldiers," she once posted, smiling beside her husband on a weekend hike. But behind the curated calm was a woman who worked hard to manage perception. Born and raised in Savannah, Rachel grew up in a household where image mattered more than emotion. Her father was a deacon. Her mother taught etiquette classes out of their living room. Rachel learned early that appearances could protect you, even when the truth threatened to collapse everything beneath the surface. In college, she was radiant. Sharp, magnetic, poised. She met Mark in their junior year at Spelman and Morehouse, respectively. He was studying engineering. Quiet, focused, the kind of man people underestimated until he spoke. Rachel saw potential, stability in him. He saw grace and confidence in her. They married within a year of graduation. Their life unfolded like a success story. Mark got a job with a defense contractor. Rachel stayed home with the boys. They bought a house in a leafy suburb with wide streets and 2-story homes. Their sons were honor roll students, polite and well-dressed. Everything about the Walkers suggested quiet achievement. But Rachel had secrets. She had needs that Mark didn't always meet. Emotional needs. Financial ones, sometimes. And as the years wore on, that quiet marriage turned hollow. Mark buried himself in work. Rachel sought validation elsewhere. Still, she never wanted to leave. Not really. She wanted the life, the house, the reputation, the control. So she kept the facade going. Even when she strayed. Even when she told herself it was just a mistake. And then another. And another. Over 15 years, she conducted a quiet campaign of deception. Lies stacked upon lies until they became the walls of her everyday life. None of her sons ever knew. Not really. Jalen, the oldest, once overheard an argument late at night. Something about trust. About betrayal. But Rachel smoothed it over with a hug and a Bible verse. Bryce once found a strange number in her phone, but she said it was a vendor from the school fundraiser. To the world, Rachel was a loving mother, a devoted wife, a pillar in the community. But to herself, she was balancing on a wire, above a pit of truth she swore would never come to light. Until Mark gave her that DNA kit, and everything she'd buried clawed its way to the surface. The first crack was so small no one noticed it. It came one night over dinner, months before the DNA results, when Mark mentioned a man from Rachel's past. Someone she'd dated briefly during college. His name was Darren Cole. Just a name, tossed into conversation, but Rachel froze. Fork halfway to her mouth. A beat too long. Then a smile. "That was forever ago," she said. "Why are you even thinking about that?" Mark let it go, but he remembered the pause. And from that moment on, his eyes started to look at her differently. Cracks began appearing elsewhere. Subtle shifts in tone. Phone calls that ended abruptly when he entered the room. Bank statements with unexplained withdrawals. Rachel claimed she was helping her sister with a down payment, or that the school fundraiser needed last-minute coverage. Her stories always had just enough detail to seem plausible, but never enough to feel solid. The children sensed something too, in their own way. Jalen noticed how their parents stopped touching. No hugs, no passing kisses. Micah, the youngest, began asking why Daddy didn't come to the basketball games anymore. Bryce took to staying in his room, headphones on, retreating from the rising unease he couldn't explain. To outsiders, it still looked picture-perfect. Rachel brought homemade cookies to church events. Mark showed up to work on time, but beneath the surface, tension hummed like an electrical wire waiting to snap. Friends noticed that Mark had grown quieter, not withdrawn, just guarded. Watching, listening more than speaking. Rachel, on the other hand, became more active. She joined a women's networking group, started attending fitness boot camps, rebranded herself online, motivational quotes, curated outfits, a new haircut. She said it was self-care, reinvention. But Mark saw something else, detachment. And then there was that night, a Thursday in October. Mark came home early from a business trip. The house was too quiet. Upstairs, their bedroom door was closed. Rachel was inside. Alone, she claimed. But the window was open, and a second glass of wine sat on the nightstand. She swore it was nothing, that he was being paranoid, that she was tired of the mistrust. Mark didn't argue. He said nothing, just stared at her for a long moment, then turned and left the room. It wasn't just betrayal that took root in that silence. It was something else, an unraveling. The slow disintegration of a marriage built on selective truths and mutual denial. And beneath it all, something darker was waking up in Mark. Mark had always been a man of logic, a systems thinker, the kind of person who believed that anything broken could be fixed, if you just understood the mechanism. That was how he approached work, finances, even his role as a father. But nothing had prepared him for the kind of fracture that couldn't be quantified. When the first DNA test came back, Mark didn't rage. He analyzed. Quietly. He told Rachel about the results calmly, even offered her a chance to explain. She blamed the lab. "These kits aren't reliable, Mark. You know that." Her voice held no fear, just irritation, like she was correcting a child. But it gnawed at him. Mark stayed up late reading scientific forums, watching geneticist interviews on YouTube, emailing customer support to demand explanations. His doubt wasn't just emotional, it was forensic. If one test was wrong, fine. 2. Suspicious. But 3? He began documenting everything. Downloaded all the raw DNA files. Cross-referenced Rachel's results with each of the boys. None of them matched him. Not even distant markers. He built a spreadsheet, color-coded it, tried to find a pattern that made sense. He couldn't. The truth was there in cold, undeniable numbers. He wasn't their father. And still, Rachel refused to confess. When he confronted her again, she flipped the narrative. "You think I'm the only one who made mistakes? What about all the years you shut down? The late nights at work? You left this marriage before I ever did." That's when something shifted. Mark stopped trying to fix the mechanism. He started preparing for the fallout. His friends at work said he seemed off. Not angry, just hollowed out. One described him as moving through the office like a man trying to remember what he forgot. At home, he barely spoke to the boys. Not out of hatred, but distance. As if they were suddenly strangers occupying his house. He began researching custody law, inheritance rights, annulments. Not loudly, just tabs open late at night, quietly closed when footsteps approached. He moved money. First 1,000 here, then 5. Eventually, the boys' college funds were drained. Gone in the course of a week. Rachel didn't notice. She hadn't checked those accounts in months. Then Mark began buying supplies. Rope, duct tape, trail maps, a burner phone, even a tactical survival bag. The receipts were hidden, burned in the fireplace when the family wasn't home. He signed out of his work email, erased his digital footprints, packed clothes in a duffel bag, and stashed it beneath a loose floorboard in the garage. He didn't leave a note, didn't warn anyone. One Friday morning in February, he simply walked out the door and never came back. But he wasn't running from the pain. He was planning something far worse. Mark's disappearance didn't send shockwaves at first. It whispered through the community like fog curling under a door. Rachel told the neighbors he was on a business retreat, then quietly shifted her story a few days later. "We're going through something private." He needed space. But the truth was far murkier. The day after Mark vanished, Rachel noticed the accounts. She logged in to check the boys' education funds, gone. Every penny. She called the bank in a fury, convinced it was a mistake. It wasn't. Mark had authorized the transfers. Methodically. Over 3 days. The funds were moved to offshore accounts in his name, then withdrawn in cash. Rachel didn't report it right away. Maybe she was embarrassed. Maybe she feared what the exposure might unearth. But more likely, she knew exactly what had caused it. What she couldn't know, was what Mark was doing next. In the days after his disappearance, Mark lived in the margins. Surveillance footage caught glimpses of him, buying fuel at a gas station in South Georgia, checking into a motel near Tallahassee under a fake name. He was calm, composed, focused, like a man carrying out a plan he'd rehearsed 1,000 times. In his backpack, investigators would later find a spiral notebook. The front page read, inventory, rope, gloves, noise suppressor, flashlight, and then in tighter, more anxious handwriting, locations, house, school parking lot, trail behind Baptist church. The next page was harder to read. It was a list. Names. Jalen, Bryce, Micah, Rachel. Each one had a dash beside it. Blank lines. Like boxes waiting to be checked. Back home, Rachel told the boys as little as possible. "Dad is sick," she said once. "He needs time." But the lie was wearing thin. Bryce had overheard her on the phone, crying. Jalen noticed she had stopped going to church, claiming migraines. Micah was having nightmares, waking up in a sweat, asking if their father was dead. Then came the day she walked into the garage and saw the floorboard lifted. The space beneath it empty. Mark's duffel bag gone. She knew then he hadn't just left in grief. He was coming back. She called a lawyer, but never filed anything official. Told no one about the bag. Not the police. Not her sister. Not even her closest friend, Vanessa, who would later testify in court that Rachel had a look in her eye, like a woman checking every shadow. By March, Rachel had changed the locks, installed cameras, and kept her phone at arm's reach at all times. But paranoia wasn't enough. Not when you know what your husband is capable of. So Rachel did what no one expected. She disappeared, too. It began with small, strange decisions. Rachel withdrew cash in heavy amounts, never more than $3,000 at a time, always from different branches. She stopped using her debit card, let the mail pile up. The woman who once color-coded her calendar now missed appointments, skipped PDA meetings, and stopped returning texts from friends. Vanessa was the first to say something. "You good?" she asked over coffee one morning. "You've been off." Rachel laughed, waved her off. "Just tired. Hormones. Stress." But her eyes darted toward the window every time a car passed. She kept checking the front door, her keys clutched tightly in her hand. Then came the night Rachel called Vanessa at 1:13 a.m. She didn't say much, just that she was scared, that she thought someone had been in the backyard. Vanessa asked if she should come over. Rachel hesitated, then whispered, "No, if something happens, I want you to take care of the boys." And then she hung up. Rachel's paranoia became a cage. She stopped letting the boys walk to school. She moved Micah's bed into her room. Jalen, frustrated by the secrecy, began to rebel. "Where's Dad?" he demanded one evening. "What aren't you telling us?" She slapped the table, eyes wide with fear. "Don't ask me that again," she said. Her voice didn't rise, but something in it made them all go quiet. At the supermarket, she flinched when someone brushed her arm. She began wearing a hoodie and sunglasses in public, even to the mailbox. At church, when she did go, she sat in the back near the exit. Her once commanding voice now trembled in casual conversation. Her smiles were all teeth, no warmth. Then abruptly she started selling things. The boys' old electronics. Her jewelry. Even the leased SUV went back to the dealership. She told the boys it was financial, but the truth was she was shedding a life. A costume. A trail of breadcrumbs. She booked the ticket in cash. Atlanta to Panama City. March 17th, red-eye flight. One way. She used a fake name, an old alias tied to her cousin's expired ID. She dyed her hair darker, packed light, and told the boys she'd be at a retreat for the weekend. The night before she left, Rachel tucked them into bed one by one. She kissed their foreheads. Jalen pretended to be asleep, but felt her linger at his door. Bryce found a note slipped into his backpack, just a sticky note with a heart drawn on it. Micah woke up the next morning crying, and didn't know why. The next time anyone saw her car, it was on fire at the edge of a wooded road. Smoke billowed into the dawn sky. Flames twisted around the frame. Inside the trunk, a burned corpse. And a family without answers. It was a jogger who found it. Early morning, just after sunrise, the air still heavy with spring damp. He noticed the black smoke before he saw the flames, thick and oily, rising from the tree line like a warning. He moved toward it slowly, uncertain, then faster once he recognized the shape beneath the smoke. A vehicle, engulfed, rear end lodged against a tree. The license plate melted, the rear windows blown out. He dialed 911 with shaking hands. By the time emergency responders arrived, the fire was nearly out, but the damage was done. What remained of the silver Honda Accord was a hollowed shell. The trunk had been forced shut despite warping from the heat. When investigators pried it open, they recoiled. A body, charred beyond recognition, fused to the lining. No identifying features remained, no wallet, no phone, no intact clothing. But the car was registered to Rachel Walker. The news spread fast. Fire. A body. Rachel. The connection was assumed instantly. And in the absence of other possibilities, the community did what humans do best. They filled in the blanks. Rachel was dead. Mark had come back. He'd killed her. The story practically wrote itself. Police treated it as a homicide from the start. A woman's car, a woman's body. Mark, already missing and linked to financial irregularities, became the prime suspect. The Walker children were pulled out of school. Detectives arrived at the house, combed Rachel's belongings, asked the boys pointed questions they couldn't begin to answer. But a forensic team grew cautious. Something was off. There were no dental records to compare. The head had suffered too much heat damage. No usable fingerprints. Even the victim's bones were scorched beyond quick identification. DNA would take weeks, maybe months, given the condition of the remains. Rachel's sister flew in from Maryland, sobbing and furious. He did this. That man killed my sister. She clutched the boys, promising they'd be safe now, that the nightmare was over. But it wasn't. 3 days later, investigators received a tip from airport security at Hartsfield-Jackson. A woman matching Rachel's description had boarded a plane on March 17th, the night before the car fire. The passenger used an alias, but the airline kept surveillance footage. The woman wore dark glasses and a scarf, moved with purpose, never looked up at the camera. When detectives played the footage in a locked briefing room, jaws dropped. It was her. Rachel Walker wasn't dead. She had faked her own death. The burned body in the trunk, still unidentified. The motive? Unknown. And the real story, so much darker than anyone imagined, was just beginning to unravel. Stay with us as we peel back the layers of this haunting mystery. Rachel Walker had always been strategic, but faking your own death required something more than calculation. It demanded nerve, precision, and above all, desperation. The Panama escape wasn't improvised. It was engineered. The plane touched down just after 6 a.m. Rachel, now going by Lisa Dean, moved through customs with a forged passport. She had no checked luggage, just a backpack, a prepaid cell phone, and an envelope stuffed with cash, close to $12,000 in mostly hundreds. Panama wasn't a random choice. It had no extradition treaty with the U.S. at the time of her planning. Rachel had done her research, quietly late at night on a VPN. She searched countries without U.S. extradition, how to disappear, and identifying bodies post-fire. She deleted her history every time, but it didn't matter. Investigators would eventually recover it from her devices. In Panama City, she checked into a hostel under a false name, then relocated after 2 nights to a beach town 3 hours away. She wore oversized sunglasses and spoke only when necessary. Locals described her as tense and always watching the door. She bought groceries in cash. Never returned to the same shop twice. Back in Georgia, detectives were racing to unravel the bizarre timeline. The corpse in the car remained unidentified. Rachel's burned vehicle had no direct signs of foul play, no blood, no evidence of restraint. But the weight of her disappearance, and the footage of her boarding that flight, shattered the previous theory. The victim in the trunk? Possibly an unhoused woman. Maybe a missing person who hadn't been reported yet. The working theory became chilling. Rachel had found a body, or caused one, and used it to fake her own death. The fire had been started using an accelerant and a timed ignition device, likely homemade. The focus shifted quickly. Rachel was no longer the presumed victim. She was now a fugitive and a person of interest in both insurance fraud and possible homicide. A federal warrant was issued. Her face was added to international watch lists. The U.S. Marshals joined the case. The boys were devastated. Jalen, only 17, gave a closed-door interview to detectives. "My mom was scared," he said, "but I didn't think she'd fake dying." Bryce refused to speak at all. Micah kept drawing pictures of flames, quietly placing them under his pillow each night. It would be 3 more weeks before a lead broke open the case. A tourist couple from Atlanta, visiting Panama, spotted Rachel in a street market. She was thinner, nervier, buying fruit, speaking broken Spanish. They took a blurry photo, sent it to a family friend, who sent it straight to police. Authorities coordinated with local law enforcement. By the time they tracked her down, Rachel had already moved again, this time deeper inland. But she wasn't hiding from them. She was hiding from Mark. Because even from thousands of miles away, Rachel knew he wasn't finished yet. Mark was found 26 days after Rachel's staged death, deep in the Chattahoochee National Forest, 90 miles north of Atlanta. He hadn't made a single phone call. No digital footprint. No attempted contact with his sons. But he wasn't just surviving in the woods. He was waiting. A park ranger first spotted him at dusk, not far from a disused hiking trail. Mark looked out of place, cleaner than someone who'd been living rough, eyes steady and sharp. The ranger called it in. When a search team arrived the next morning, they found him in a makeshift shelter of tarps and brush. Mark surrendered without resistance. But what they found in his possession chilled everyone involved. In his duffel bag, a roll of industrial duct tape, 2 coils of nylon rope, a lockable utility knife, rubber gloves, plastic sheeting, and a suppressed pistol that had been partially disassembled. Alongside it all, a notebook. Inside were sketches of the Walker house floor plan, school parking lots, and routes to the church youth center. Dates, times, margin notes. He had been studying his family's movements meticulously. One page simply read, "End of the line." Beneath that, 4 names: Jalen, Bryce, Micah, Rachel, each with a checkbox. All still blank. When questioned, Mark barely spoke. At first, he asked for a lawyer. Then, as hours turned into days, something cracked. The man who had once been a reliable father, the steady provider, began to talk. It wasn't a confession, not right away, but fragments began to surface. He spoke of betrayal, of the humiliation. "Every time I looked at those boys, I wanted to believe," he said. "But they weren't mine. Not biologically. Not spiritually. Rachel lied for almost 2 decades. I built my life on sand." Detectives pushed harder. What was the plan? Why the weapons? The list? "I wasn't going to let her win," Mark said, voice low and flat. "She took everything. My name. My money. My sons. I didn't have anything left except the truth. And if no one else was going to see it, I'd make them see it." When asked about the burned body, Mark shook his head. "I didn't kill anyone. That wasn't me. That was Rachel." He paused. "She's not who you think she is." Investigators now had 2 nightmares colliding. A mother who staged her own death and vanished across international lines, and a father who had been preparing to murder his entire family. It wasn't just a case of right and wrong. It was 2 deeply broken people, locked in a war of secrets and silence, with their children caught in the crossfire. But Mark hadn't accounted for one thing. Rachel was still alive, and when the justice system caught up with both of them, the public would be forced to choose. Who was the monster, and who was just trying to survive? For the 3 Walker boys, life after the explosion of both fire and truth was like surviving a plane crash midair. Nothing grounded, nothing safe, no clear idea which direction meant healing or more harm. Jalen, 17 and just months away from graduation, bore the weight with quiet fury. He stepped into the role of protector, shielding Bryce and Micah from the avalanche of news. The reporters camped near their driveway, the sideways glances at school. But when the house went still at night, he'd sit in the hallway outside his brother's rooms, back against the wall, phone screen dark, listening for anything, footsteps, sirens, a voice at the door. Bryce, 15, shut down entirely. He refused counseling. Barely spoke to case workers. Teachers reported a drop in grades and missed assignments. He stopped going to basketball practice, then stopped going outside altogether. His Google searches, quietly monitored by the Department of Family and Children's Services, included phrases like, "Can your parents both go to jail?" and "Is DNA more important than love?" Micah, the youngest at 12, held on to fantasy. He told classmates his parents were in the CIA, that the fire was staged to protect them during an undercover mission. He clung to stories because they were easier than truth. Easier than explaining how his mom faked her death and his dad packed rope to kill them. They were moved into the care of Rachel's sister, Patrice, who tried her best. But she wasn't their mother. She wasn't their father. She was angry. Angry at Mark, at Rachel, at the impossible trauma now sitting in the middle of her living room every night like smoke no one could clear. The community's support came in waves. First casseroles and GoFundMe links, then silence, then judgment. People whispered. Some blamed Mark entirely. Others speculated about Rachel. Church elders publicly prayed for the boys, but behind closed doors, questioned how a family so godly could fall so far. At school, classmates tried to offer sympathy. One girl told Jalen, "At least your mom's alive, right?" He walked away before she could finish. The boys weren't just grieving their parents. They were grieving the illusion of what they'd been raised to believe. That family meant safety. That love meant truth. That parents were the protectors, not the threat. And in this shattered space, they began forging their own answers. Jalen applied to local colleges instead of going out of state. "Someone has to stay close," he told Patrice. Bryce asked to legally change his last name. Micah started writing letters, unsigned, unsent, addressed to both parents. In one he wrote, "If I wasn't yours, why'd you still come to my games?" The tragedy hadn't just broken their home. It had cracked their very sense of self. But what the boys didn't know, what no one did, was that investigators had uncovered new evidence. And soon, the past wasn't going to be the only thing collapsing. The investigation, now involving local, federal, and international agencies, had grown labyrinthine. What began as a simple missing persons report had become a multilayered pursuit of truth, one that would unearth fraud, conspiracy, and a murder still waiting for a name. The first break came from the Georgia Bureau of Investigation's forensic lab. DNA from the burned body in Rachel's car had degraded extensively, but mitochondrial DNA, passed through maternal lines, had survived. It didn't match Rachel. It didn't match any family member in the Walker tree. But it did match someone else, a woman named Destiny Cole. Destiny had been reported missing 6 weeks prior, by no one. She'd been houseless, on and off drugs, known to drift between shelters. But she had one thing Rachel needed: the right build, the right complexion, the right invisibility. Surveillance footage near the downtown bus terminal showed the two women meeting briefly. Rachel handed her a backpack. Destiny nodded, then followed her toward a side alley. Destiny was never seen again. Detectives believe Rachel used her, promised food, maybe money, maybe more. They couldn't prove what happened in that alley, but they could map the fallout. Destiny vanished that night. Rachel's car was stolen 2 days later and set ablaze with the corpse inside. A calculated, methodical burial by fire. But Rachel's fingerprints, once thought absent, were found on the gas can, beneath a layer of soot, overlooked in the initial sweep. Now Rachel faced far more than insurance fraud. Meanwhile, financial investigators combed through years of digital footprints. Mark had been transferring small sums out of joint accounts for months before the DNA discovery, amounts too small to trigger red flags. He'd opened cryptocurrency wallets, purchased camping gear, burner phones, even a second vehicle under an alias. They also discovered disturbing purchases, a lock-picking set, a guidebook on silent killing techniques, dark web searches on how to spoof cell phone pings. Mark hadn't snapped. He had prepared. But what chilled detectives most wasn't what either of them had done individually. It was how their lies had grown in response to each other. This was not a single betrayal. It was an arms race. In one recovered journal entry from Rachel's bedroom, she had scrawled, "I think he's going to do it." Not rage, something colder. "I see it in his eyes. I can't prove it. But I know." Below it, one word was underlined 3 times: run. The psychological portrait investigators were now piecing together wasn't clean. It was tangled, codependent, layered in paranoia and pride. Mark saw himself as a wronged man driven to desperate clarity. Rachel saw herself as a trapped woman who had to vanish to survive. But the law wasn't interested in perspective. It was building a case. And both of them were now racing toward justice, with only one question left unresolved. Who would face it first? They brought Mark into the interrogation room just after noon. No cuffs, no threats, just a recorder placed gently on the table, and 2 detectives who already knew more than they let on. The room was plain, but every angle had been measured. Mark sat upright, jaw tense, eyes blank. Detective Avery led. Calm, soft-voiced, not playing good cop, just careful cop. Mark, we need to talk about the list. Silence. We found it in your notebook. 4 names. You wrote them. You packed the weapons. You scouted the locations. But you hadn't checked the boxes yet. Still silence. You didn't kill anyone. Not yet. You had the chance, but you didn't take it. Why? Mark's voice was low when it finally came. Because she beat me to it. They pressed him gently. Why the rope? Why the gun? Why the tactical gear? Mark said he only wanted answers. He said the items were precautions. That he wanted to confront Rachel, not kill her. But the evidence told a different story. The knife had been sharpened, oiled. The plastic sheeting was folded with practiced care. The duct tape had measured tears, pieces pre-cut and ready to use. You don't prepare like that for a conversation. You prepare like that for containment, for silence. Detectives showed him the flight footage. Rachel boarding the plane. Mark stared for a long time. Do you still think she's dead? One of them asked. Mark blinked once. Then, no. They moved next to the photos of the burned body. The evidence that the victim wasn't Rachel. That it was Destiny Cole. That Rachel had lured an unhoused woman into a trap and used her as a stand-in corpse. Mark showed no shock. Only something colder. Of course she did, he said. She's always been smarter than me. Just never thought she'd go that far. That was when he said the line that would be quoted in every article, every courtroom write-up, every podcast dissecting the case. I wasn't trying to kill my family. I was trying to kill the lie. It didn't matter. Prosecutors had enough. Attempted conspiracy to commit murder. Illegal weapons possession. Child endangerment. Fraud. The list stacked quickly. Rachel, meanwhile, had been detained in Panama. Held under immigration violations while U.S. Marshals filed extradition papers. She fought it. Hired local lawyers, claimed domestic abuse, painted herself a victim of stalking and psychological trauma. And some believed her. That was the problem. Both stories had slivers of truth. Rachel had lied. Mark had planned violence. Each saw themselves as the betrayed one. Each believed the children were safer without the other. But now both were in custody. And their children, caught in the rip between 2 collapsing worlds, were about to watch the full truth be dragged into the light. In court. In headlines. And in testimony that would rewrite everything they thought they knew. The trial was unlike anything the county courthouse had ever seen. 2 defendants. 2 stories. 1 broken family. Rachel and Mark were tried separately, but the cases were intertwined, and the courtroom overflowed with journalists, community members, and legal observers drawn to the grotesque complexity of it all. The DA called it a tragic war of mirrors. No heroes. Just consequences. Mark's trial came first. He entered the courtroom in a navy suit, hands shackled at the waist, his face unreadable. The prosecution opened with the list, those 4 names written in ink, beside a column of unchecked boxes. They brought out the weapons, the survival gear, the forensic digital logs showing search history terms like quietest way to kill and how to subdue a person in under 30 seconds. But the most powerful evidence wasn't material. It was emotional. Jalen, now legally an adult, took the stand. His voice trembled, but he looked his father straight in the eye. He stopped being my dad the day he walked out that door. The man sitting there planned to hurt us. I don't care what excuses he has. I read the notebook. Bryce sat in the gallery, gripping Micah's hand. Neither spoke. The defense painted a different picture, a betrayed husband. A man undone by a decade of deception. They emphasized the lack of physical violence. He didn't hurt anyone, Mark's attorney said. He disappeared, yes, but he didn't act on the plan. Because deep down, he knew it was wrong. But the jury didn't need blood to see intent. Mark was found guilty of conspiracy to commit murder, unlawful possession of a firearm, and child endangerment. The judge, a former family law practitioner, looked visibly shaken as he delivered the sentence: 35 years, with no possibility of parole for at least 20. Rachel's trial followed. Her charges: fraud, arson, desecration of a human body, and obstruction of justice. And, hovering beneath it all, the unspoken accusation: did she murder Destiny Cole? The prosecution didn't have enough for homicide. The cause of death was undetermined due to the fire damage. But they built their argument around manipulation: Rachel's planning, the forged ID, the cash withdrawals, the gas can. They called it premeditated vanishing by sacrificial proxy. Rachel's defense stunned everyone. She admitted the fraud, admitted fleeing, admitted planting the body to appear dead. But she swore she didn't kill Destiny. "I met her by chance," she testified, weeping. "She was sick. She said she didn't have anyone left. She asked me to take her somewhere warm. I didn't think she'd die." The jury didn't believe her. Rachel was found guilty on all counts except murder. She was sentenced to 28 years. She wept as the verdict was read, whispering, "Tell my sons I'm sorry." But no one was sure who the apology was for, or if it mattered anymore. Two ghosts, now made visible, caged but never truly contained. And their sons, watching from the back row, knew one truth above all. They had no parents left, only each other. The trials ended, but the echoes didn't. In Atlanta, the Walker family's story became a dark fable, passed in hushed conversations, church gossip, true crime blogs, and eventually documentary specials. People argued not just about what happened, but what should have happened. Some painted Mark as a man undone by deceit, a ticking time bomb who'd kept the pain bottled too long. Others saw him as the very monster Rachel feared, a manipulator who masked cruelty in calm calculation. Rachel, too, polarized the public. To some, she was a brilliant survivor, driven to extreme measures by the looming threat of violence. To others, she was a con artist who faked her death, exploited the vulnerable, and let an innocent woman burn in her place. The community fractured. At school, students debated the case as if it were fiction. She was scared. What choice did she have? One would argue. Another would counter. She had 3 sons. You don't get to disappear like that. Even within the justice system, opinions diverged. One juror from Rachel's trial later said, "I think she believed she was protecting her kids. But that doesn't excuse that level of deception." Another from Mark's trial admitted, "We convicted him on what he might have done. But I didn't want to be the one who gambled with those boys' lives." The question that hovered above everything: was it self-preservation or preemptive warfare? In one of the final court filings, the estate was divided. The home was sold. All remaining accounts frozen pending civil suits. The proceeds were placed into a trust, controlled by a guardian until the youngest, Micah, turned 18. The trust's name, chosen by Jalen: No More Secrets. The therapist assigned to the boys said something profound in a post-trial hearing. What destroyed this family wasn't just betrayal. It was silence, the kind that wraps around pain and never lets it speak. That line resonated. Across social media, the Walker case became a symbol, not just of domestic tragedy, but of the cost of secrets. Advocacy groups began using it as a cautionary tale. Not about DNA kits or fraud or weapons in the woods, but about the quiet erosion of trust behind closed doors. Some called for new legislation, better protections for children caught in criminal investigations, stronger mental health support for families of both victims and perpetrators. A few even suggested laws requiring disclosure of non-biological parentage in legal documents. None of it passed, but conversations happened, and that, in a story soaked in lies and fire, was something. Micah later wrote in a school essay, "My mom ran. My dad planned. I stayed. That's the hardest part. You don't know how loud silence can be until you're sitting in it alone." He didn't read it aloud in class. He just left it on the teacher's desk and signed. But she knew. And she cried. Years passed. The media coverage faded. The podcast episodes stopped. The court transcripts gathered dust. But the legacy of the Walker tragedy didn't disappear. It deepened. Jalen became the legal guardian of his brothers the day he turned 21. He delayed college, took a job managing logistics at a shipping company, and kept the family together with the quiet discipline that mirrored his father, before everything went dark. But unlike Mark, Jalen spoke. He answered the hard questions. He asked his brothers how they were, even when the answers were messy. He didn't try to be a father. He tried to be real. Bryce eventually returned to school and began writing, a blog at first, anonymous, raw. Then essays. Then articles. He explored identity, grief, the limits of truth. One post went viral. The Lie We Inherited. A searing personal piece about learning your entire childhood was built on fiction and choosing not to hate the architects. Micah, always the most emotionally complex, went quiet for years. Then, on his 18th birthday, he posted a photo on Instagram. A burning candle beside 4 small stones, each one painted with a name, destiny. Rachel. Mark. Me. No caption. Just silence. But the message was clear. And then came the foundation. No More Secrets, Jalen's Trust Initiative, evolved into a nonprofit. Its mission: support youth affected by parental incarceration and domestic trauma. They offered free therapy, legal guidance, workshops on emotional resilience. One of their most powerful programs? A school outreach initiative called Echoes, where kids learn to speak before silence becomes survival. Rachel remained incarcerated in a women's facility in Florida. She applied for early release twice. Both were denied. Her letters to her sons, few and infrequent, went unanswered. One line from her last attempt stood out. "If I could do it over, I would have told the truth, even if it destroyed me." Mark, serving his sentence in a medium-security prison in Georgia, never asked for parole. He refused interviews, refused visits. The one letter he sent, addressed to the boys, was never opened. It remains sealed in a safe at Jalen's home. Maybe one day they'll read it. Maybe not. People ask what justice looks like in a case like this. Is it years in prison? Public disgrace? Is it 3 boys growing into men who had to become honest in a world where lies almost ended them? There's no easy answer. But in 2025, a documentary premiered, Ashes and Inheritance. It ended with footage of Micah, standing at a community center podium, reading the closing lines of his first published poem. "I lived through fire. I lived through fraud. I lived through love that didn't know how to last. But I'm still here. And silence didn't break me. It taught me how to speak." If this story moved you, share your thoughts in the comments. And if you're drawn to stories of resilience, identity, and the fight for truth, don't forget to subscribe. The Walkers remind us, even in silence, actions can echo louder than words.